Ah, there you are. I would like to introduce you to a wonderful story about the Wizard of Oz, which I've arranged for classical guitar in kind of a magnum opus that expresses the ideas in the songs contained in not a sweet, but kind of a large work, shall we say. Hyman Arlen, also known as Harold Arlen, son of a Jewish cantor from New York, was hired by MGM Louis B. Mayer to compose songs for the adaptation of the novels that are so popular and so well known today, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And what was he hired to do? Well, he had already quickly written all the songs except one, and they needed a ballad. Now, before I get into that ballad, which you'll know, can you imagine writing a song with your cigarette and your scotch on the piano with the title, If I Only Had a Brain? Which is quite a very funny thing. But he had finished up doing that work for Mr. Mayer. They wanted a ballad, and so you know what's coming. He was going to write Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which is one of the most beloved songs, other than White Christmas, shall I say, in the American Songbook, and for decades has held that position. Now, how did he do that? Well, he was driving down Sunset Boulevard with his wife, going to a late matinee movie at Grauman's Chinese Theater. And he was driving and saw, believe it or not, a rainbow. This is a true story. Like any good composer, he was carrying manuscript paper with him, and he started to jot down the A and B themes. Those A and B themes were going to be, believe it or not, controversial, as you'll see in a moment. So we all know that Dorothy sang in sepia tone in front of a hay cart over the rainbow in the sequence that's before they get to the land of Oz. And I'm going to tell you that that song should never have been heard by anybody. And why is that? Because it was taken out of the film 3 times. And the reasons why it was taken out of the film are incredibly funny. The first one, Louis B. Mayer came down to see the dailies, or the work that had been done that day on the film, and found the ballad of singing in front of that hay cart with Toto to be just, he hated it. He did not like it at all. And so he was going to, he said, take it out of the film, I don't want it. And as they took it out of the film, they thought, well, there it is, the big boss said no. Well, one of the engineers and one of the editors as well said, you know, I love that song. And they convinced Louis B. Mayer to keep it in the film because they needed a slow ballad and one of aspiration to do the contrast of her being on the farm, and of course she's aspiring to be somewhere, and boy did she get somewhere. So they put it back in. Louis B. Mayer put it back in. So why is that important? Well, the next thing that happened, I think, is reflective of our culture as well. Somebody else listened to it, and they were offended by the octave leap that starts at the very beginning of the piece. And as Somewhere Over the Rain. And so as can you imagine being offended by that? Well, it offended the powers that be, and they took it out again. Once again, the editor convinced the management that to keep it in. and it got back in. So that's a brief history of that song, a beloved ballad from the American Songbook that has now stood the test of time. Another story that happened on the set of the filming of that classic motion picture was Margaret Hamilton, who played the witch, as we know, and became quite identified with the role, was a stage actress and quite esteemed in her day. Well, you know, back in those days, to get that green color on her face, of course, she had to be painted. Well, the paint wasn't very amenable. And what do I mean by that? Well, before we get into her, I'm going to talk a little bit about Buddy Ebsen, who was the original Tin Man. And he had put on the silver paint, and he spent 2 weeks in the hospital because there's lead in that paint, and it's very poisonous and not very good for you. So what happened with Margaret Hamilton? Well, everyone knows the scene of where she is just completed her first entrance, that her sister had been killed with the house, and she was talking to Dorothy and the Good Witch, and now she's going to go away, and she's made her threats to Dorothy about, you'd better watch yourself. Well, what happened? Well, at that time, there's a trap door on that stage. So she was positioned on top of the trapdoors, well, she should be, and they're going to light off one of those smoke bombs, and she's going to vanish, and it's all going to be very magical. Well, they set the bomb off and let the trapdoor go so that she would fall down there, because there were 2 Union men waiting at the bottom with a mattress for her to fall on. And what happened? Well, when the smoke bomb went off, she caught on fire. So that's not very nice. So she caught on fire, and all over her face, that green paint, and they're down there as she's falling through the trapdoor. She's saying, my God, Margaret's on fire. And they're blotting her out with anything they can find at hand, because they didn't anticipate her being on fire. So that's another story of the Wizard of Oz and the hijinks. Now I'm going to segue right into another part of this, because you're going to be listening to this arrangement for classical guitar. But there's another story that people don't know. Remember the coroner that was having to examine the dead witch that had been killed by Dorothy with the house falling on her? Well, the coroner was dressed in this green robish outfit, a kind of monkish outfit, and he had red hair, dyed red hair, and a mustache and a goatee, red mustache and goatee. And his statement was, well, she's not just really dead, she's most sincerely dead. And, or maybe it was sincerely dead and really dead. But he was, of course, officially identifying her as dead. And so who is that person? Well, that person became, years later, in the 50s, remember we're talking late 30s here, film is released in 39, he became the Oscar Mayer spokesman. He was, of course, a dwarf, a midget, and he became Little Oscar, the one that drove around the Weenie Mobile and would go to shopping centers, and the kids would buy the new releases of the products like Mountain Dew from Pepsi-Cola bottling company and other products, and the Oscar Mayer wieners. So that's who that was. A few more stories about Frank L. Baum, who wrote those books, some of them at least, in the Hotel Coronado down in San Diego, where he took rooms. In that era, it's very common to do that. Very few people owned homes. Most people rented and had very low rents. So he wrote those books there, and there's a great tale that is in a display case in the Coronado that tells of how Frank Morgan, the actor that played Wizard of Oz, and Frank L. Baum had something in common. And what was that? Well, when Frank Morgan got the role to play the wizard, and of course the gentleman that's in the kind of the gypsy cart there, telling, you know, the soothsayer, he was told to go down to Hollywood Costume and pick up his tails. Well, he went down there, and those are the tails you see him throughout the film wearing, even as the wizard and in the other role. And believe it or not, he looked in the pocket and stitched on the pocket, which was common in this era to do, was the name of the person that owned it before, and it was Frank L. Baum, who had owned those tails. So Frank Morgan used the tails that Frank L. Baum had owned, which is quite the synchronicity, quite the coincidence. See, we never know where things are going to take us in life, do we? And now, I want to present to you The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, written by Harold Arlen. And if you look up and see videos there on the page, click on videos, then just click Control F and write Oz in. And out of the list of all those videos there's probably about 100 now, maybe more by the time you see this, you'll be able to find it. The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and I hope you enjoy it.